thank you very much for joining us for our talk about Ecuador. I'm your host this evening. My name's Chris Smith, one of three Chris's in the Wildlife Worldwide team. I used to be a travel consultant, but now these days I'm a product manager, which entails looking after a number of our group tours around the world, including a few to Ecuador. And increasingly a number of group tours with our speaker this evening, TV naturalist and tour leader extraordinaire, Mr. Mike Dilger. There he is, ta-da! Here's one we made earlier. Just before I hand over to Mike, I know you want to hear from him a lot more than you want to hear from me. If you do have any questions at all about Ecuador, please pop them in the chat or the Q&A function. That's hopefully at the bottom of your screen or somewhere on your screen. I may answer some of them whilst Mike is talking, but at the same time, we may keep a few to give to Mike later on, just so everyone can hear the answer and hear a little bit more. There'll also be a poll at the end of Mike's presentation where you can choose to select any number of trips you might wish to get more information on. They're all trips that Mike leads for us, including Ecuador, obviously, as a variety of other ones as well. So that will be at the end of the presentation, and I'll let you know when that goes up too. But without further ado, more than enough from me, and over to the main man himself, Mr. Mike Dilger. Take it away.
Chris, thank you so much. Good evening, fine folk. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'll have to be on my best behavior tonight because Chris actually is my boss for quite a few of the tours that I do. Where do I go with this, with Wildlife Worldwide? Somerset Levels, Mull, Shetland, Speyside, a lot, Ecuador, Madagascar, and Indonesia next year. So you guys are very kindly giving me lots of work. I absolutely love tour leading. I suppose my job is now professional plate spinner. Well, it's not working for some reason, so I'll have to do that. For those of you who don't know me, frankly, you're a disgrace. Having worked all over in the tropics as a biologist and in Britain as a biologist, I got work on the One Show. One da 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 da, one da 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 da. One cut to a live studio audience with Adrian Charles and Christine Blakely, and then Matt Baker and Alex Jones, and now Alex Jones and random celebrities. So working a lot on that. And I used to full-time be a wildlife presenter, but nowadays I still do the wildlife presenting, but I mix that with a whole array of other jobs, primarily a lot of tour leading and a lot of tour leading with Wildlife Worldwide, on top of my writing for BBC Wildlife, the books I do, the talks I give on cruise ships and whatever. So anyway, delighted to come and talk about probably my second favourite country on planet Earth. I suppose my second favourite country, because if you count England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales all as one, then my next favourite country, without a doubt, is Ecuador. It's a country that I know really well. Prior to all my work on the One Show, I actually lived in Ecuador for over a year and a half. I flipping love this country. The fine specimen you see in front of me, in front of you, with a follically challenged and probably slightly heavier than I should be, is after a long period working away in the tropics. And this is what I used to look like when I was working back out in the cloud forest and the rainforest of Ecuador. Here I am, about 3 stone lighter than I am now, with 3 snakes. I've got a rat snake in my left hand. I've got a little constrictor, a little boa constrictor or a python around my neck. And the dangerous one is in my right hand. That's one of the fer-de-lances or rattlesnakes. And just goes to show, I found those 3 snakes in Ecuador in about 5 minutes. And that is the sum total of snakes that you can see in Britain. Throughout the country, of course, grass snake, adder, and smooth snake, if you're very lucky. So, I mean, we're going to be talking a lot about this lovely word that I adore, which is biodiversity, biological diversity, the incredibly rich wildlife that you can see right across South America, and particularly in the cloud forest of Ecuador. So the first time I went to Ecuador, I was working as a research biologist doing my master's, my MSc in ecology at Bangor University. And one of the old students said, do any of the current crop of students want to come and do their master's thesis in Ecuador, in the cloud forests? And three of us put our hand up, and I did my project on moths, mariposa nocturna, or polilla, as they say in Spanish. So I was moth trapping by night, and I was bird watching by day. And I just fell in love with the tropics, and particularly Ecuador. I was doing a project looking at the deforestation. So you put a moth trap in the forest, you put a moth trap in an area that's completely deforested, you run them on the same night, and you come to the stunning conclusion there are more moths in the trap in the forest than there are in an area that's completely lost its forest. Sounds pretty obvious, but anyway, I had a most amazing time doing it. To cut a long story short, I worked in Ecuador, I went to work in Vietnam, I went to work in Tanzania, and then I thought, I've done Africa, Asia, and South America, which is the best continent? And it had to be Ecuador. I had to go back, and I worked in Ecuador for another year, working in the cloud forest. So for those of you not familiar where Ecuador is, here's a map of South America with all the countries broken up into different colors. You look west, on the west side, the Pacific side, you can see Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Now, these three countries are the most biologically diverse countries, certainly for birds in South America. Everyone thinks Brazil's the most biodiverse. No, it's not, because the reason why Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru are incredibly rich is because they straddle the Andes, that big backbone that runs right the way from northwest Colombia all the way through Ecuador, Peru, and down Argentina and Chile as well. And the Andes are like a big letter M, like that. So you've got the western slopes, you've got the Pacific here, you've got the western slopes, you've got the inter-Andean corridor where my chin is, then you've got the eastern Cordilleras, and then you slide down the eastern slopes, and then you hit Amazon rainforest. And that goes into Ecuador, the Amazon in Ecuador, and then obviously onto Peru, onto Brazil, for 3,500 miles of rainforest. It's just the finest tropical forest in the world. But I was first working in the Western Cordilleras. So the reason why these three countries are so biologically diverse is not only do they have a chunk of Amazon rainforest, but they have these mountains, and cloaking or clothing either side of the western slope and the eastern slope, and sometimes in the inter-Andean corridor, you've got cloud forest, bosque tropical nublado. So if you imagine, you imagine that you're a raindrop and you're coming in off the Pacific coast, you're following the prevailing winds, you join up with lots of other raindrops, you hit the west of the Andes, you're forced uphill, and then you get colder and colder, and then you condense, and then all these clouds actually sit in the canopy of the rainforest. So it's forest on slopes and forest that's beautifully kind of cloudy and incredibly atmospheric. So it's a wonderful place and a very different place to the Amazon. So I was working at two reserves, a place called Los Cedros and Maquipacuna, so on these western slopes, just northwest of the capital, Quito. And we'll come back to Maquipacuna in a moment, because that's where we're visiting when we go to Ecuador. And obviously the first trip I'm doing with Wildlife Worldwide to Ecuador, even though I know it very well, is April this year. It's sold out, for which I'm enormously grateful. And we're obviously hoping to run the trip next April, for April 2025 as well. So talking about this bosque tropical nublado. So these clouds just sit in the canopy of the forest. And quite often when you go to the Amazon, if anyone's been before, it's super flat. And you can walk for hours along the paths, and you know, you're not changing altitude much. Whereas these can be a little bit steep in places. They're incredibly threatened. A large proportion of the cloud forests have been chopped down for timber, for mining, for housing, particularly for pasture for cattle. But there are still good chunks remaining, and we're going to one of the best areas around Maquipacuna, a place I used to work. So here's the cloud forest. I mean, it's just, look at that. It's absolutely gorgeous. And well, the first thing you notice when you go into the cloud forest, you notice plants that grow on plants. It's the epiphytic lifestyle. So there's a reason why, excuse me, there's a reason why they grow on other plants, because they're trying to get access to light higher up. And also that's where the moisture is. So they can extract moisture from the clouds. And when it's raining, they're the first to get to the rain. Down on the forest floor, quite often it can be dark, so there's not so much sunlight, and the rain takes a while to percolate down there. So you get these epiphytes, plants that live on plants. This is a huge, big aeroid leaf. So when you go in there, first and foremost, you notice plants up above you, not just on the ground. It's a really atmospheric, beautiful place to be in as well. And you know you're in really good quality forest when you're walking on the paths and you're walking off the paths and you can walk easily. And that's because the canopy cover is really complete. So actually, very little light comes down to the forest floor, and it can be quite sparse and easy to walk through. If anyone sees these programs where they're chopping, slashing through jungle with a machete, that means basically they're in fairly rubbish forest, because all the trees have been taken out and all the undergrowth has shot up really quickly. So something like this with the light just peeling through the tree ferns and down to these melastomes, these plants on the forest floor, it's a beautiful place to be. I'm going to use those two words again, biodiversity and epiphytes. So in Britain, we have something like 57 species of orchids. Every single one of them is terrestrial, so it grows on the ground. So the marsh orchids, the bee orchids, the fly orchids, the helleborines. You forgive me, I've got a bit of a cold. But in Ecuador, in the cloud forest, certainly the vast majority of them are epiphytic. They live up in the canopy where they can get the sunlight and get that rain. So they're growing on big mossy boughs of trees. Now, this is one of the orchids you can see it in the cloud forest of Ecuador. This is a brassia orchid or a spider orchid. And you can see from those petals and sepals, they look like the long arms of a spider. And to talk about biodiversity, as I said, 57 different species of orchid in Britain. In Macipacuna, there have been 250 species of orchid identified. So if you like orchids, and a TV mate of mine said they're so sexy, he calls them honorary mammals. If you love things like beautiful plants like orchids, then really the cloud forest of Ecuador, particularly on the western slopes, are the world's epicenter, the richest place on earth for orchids. Also, as well as growing up in the canopies, you get these beautiful things called bromeliads. Now, if you've never heard of bromeliads, you've probably eaten one of them. A pineapple, for example, is a member of the bromeliad family. And if you look at it, that looks like a kind of slightly kind of attenuated, excuse me, skinny version of a pineapple. And these are growing up in the canopy as well. And they're famed because they create this strap of leaves at the base called a bromeliad tank. Now, these tanks hold water. So quite often you get poison arrow frogs actually breeding in the bromeliad tanks. So sometimes when these fall down to the ground, if a bough breaks, then the herpetologists are looking for frogs that are in the bromeliad tank. So it's amazing. Right above your head, you can see these habitats being created and little tiny niches that you never knew existed. It's a very beautiful place. We're looking at, for example, on the left here, we're looking at a tree fern. As South Americans call them, leche arborea. Leche is fern, arborea is tree. When I was working in the cloud forest of Ecuador, I was very lucky to hang out with real experts, bird experts, mammal experts, botanical researchers. And I was walking around with this chap called Dr. Grady Webster. And he was identifying the families of the various trees for me, because it's just, I mean, we go into a forest in Britain, we see oak, ash, beech, birch, hazel, and then we start to kind of run out of trees that we can see, new species of tree. And every single tree I was looking at was different. And this plant here was growing in the understory. And I said, oh, what, Dr. Webster, what's that plant? He goes, that plant's named after me, Mersina websteri. So it's so many undiscovered plants there that he was actually finding new species to science all the time in the cloud forest. So, I mean, so even if you can't put a name to it or give it a name, then you can still enjoy. So we're talking about epiphytic plants, biodiversity, but lots of rare plants, which is a really, really kind of great place to be. I love seeing rare things, rare plants, rare birds, rare mammals. I love anything that's rare. So, I mean, it's full of rare things, the South American forests. Lots of medicinal plants, of course, as well. This has got a fantastic Spanish name. It's called lengua de suegra, which means mother-in-law's tongue. And I suppose you can see that kind of wicked red tip to the leaf. But this one's got huge medicinal values. It's meant to kind of help with women, for example, and monitoring their menstrual cycle. It's proved to have kind of incredibly good pharmaceutical uses in that respect. But for example, you go to Ecuador, cinchona, the famous cinchona tree, that's where quinine comes from. And quinine, of course, was used to treat malaria back in the day. So all these forests, be it cloud forests or be it the Amazon, they have a vast resource of potentially useful medicinal plants that, I mean, it's folly chopping these forests down because they hold hold cures to all the world's ailments. If only we take the time to properly conserve them, protect them, and research them. Birds, lots of birds. Oh my word, the cloud forest. I mean, probably if you really love your mammals, if fur is really your thing rather than feathers, I would say the Amazon is slightly richer. But if you love feathers, then the cloud forests are off the Richter scale. So when we arrive at Makipakuna, this reserve I know, we turn up, we drive straight to the entrance. There's a bridge across. There's a river below. You can stand there. And if you look down, you can see Pato Torriente with a bit of luck, the torrent duck. So you can see the male on the left and the female on the right. It's a sexually dimorphic species, so they look completely different. But they're absolutely gorgeous to look at. So hopefully if we spend a bit of time looking at the river, watching the water tumbling down below the bridge, with a bit of luck, we should see the torrent ducks there. Everyone wants to go to South America and see some of its signature birds, birds like toucans, birds like the parrots, but also hummingbirds. The cloud forests of Ecuador have the richest diversity of hummingbirds in the world. I don't care what you think about it. People say, oh, there's loads in Brazil, Costa Rica's great. I mean, the cloud forests in Ecuador are the richest. I used to work at the reserve and I've seen 30 different species of hummingbird at this one reserve. This is a white-necked Jacobin. You can't quite see the little white neck round the back on the nape of the bird. But the great thing is that when you walk around the forest, you can see hummingbirds, and quite often they buzz straight in your face, and they're looking around at you, and then they're whizzing off, and they find another plant, and they're feeding on that plant, taking the nectar. But the great thing is we've got lots of feeders at places like Makipakuna as well. So there's nothing finer than having a gin and tonic or an Ecuadorian beer sitting where we have our breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and watching the hummingbirds come into the hummingbird feeders. This is a booted racket tail. Look at those lovely long tail streamers and the little rackets on the end. And it's absolutely tiny. It's the body of the bird is about 1.5 to 2 inches. And it's got this lovely delicate tail. As it flies in, the tails and the feathers of the tail just wiggle as well. It's an absolute top quality bird. Just walking around the cloud forest, there'll be lots of kind of low level walks where not too strenuous, and then a little bit up and a little bit down. I mean, the trails can be muddy, but we usually get kind of Wellington boots given to us. I mean, it is cloud forest, it is rainforest. I mean, there's a reason why there are so many plants there. I mean, it can be quite wet there, but usually the mornings can be quite dry, and then it rains a bit more in the afternoon. So when you're out in the forest, you're looking for birds like this. This is the broad-billed mot-mot. It's got a tail a little bit like the booted racket tail, and it sits motionless in the understory, and its tail just swings like that, like a grandfather clock. And I don't know if you're going to, I've got the sound of this bird. It's a beautiful sound that echoes throughout the cloud forest. So forgive me if your broadband speed is not fast enough or you can't hear it. Hopefully you can hear me, but I've got a call of the bird. This is the call of the broad-billed mot-mot. So you're listen for this bird. And when you hear it, then you know that this bird with its pendulum-like tail is pretty close. So hopefully some or most of you will be able to hear this call. For those of you who can't hear it, it's that echoes throughout the understory. Probably one of the birds that most people want to see is Gallo de la Peña, which is the Andean cock of the rock. It is, in ornithological parlance, a bobby dazzler. This is the male. The females are dull olive green all over. So the males have got this beautiful pink, orangey pink plumage with a massive big crest. They've got black and silver wings and yellow legs. Now, it's a lekking species. So every day, dawn and dusk, the Andean cock of the rock, or the males, 10 or 15 of them, will go to an ancestral lekking tree. And they display to the females. So the female will come up next to them in the tree, adjacent tree, and check them out. And the males just look across and suddenly there's the female watching, and their crest goes up and they flap these black and silver wings and go. It's a wonderful sound. And they're all going crazy, and the females watching them, and the males will look at the females, and the female just goes, whatever, and just flies off, and all the males are a bit downhearted and a bit dejected. But then another female comes around and they go for it again. So, I mean, one of the top birds, and we'll hopefully get a chance to catch up with the Gallo de la Peña. I've talked about biodiversity, epiphytes. I also want to talk about endemism. I've talked about rarities or endemism. Endemism is a species that are endemic species. I've got a very confined distribution. Like Madagascar, for example, most of the species in Madagascar, or a lot of the birds, are confined to Madagascar and nowhere else in the world. And it's the same in countries like Ecuador. This is the toucan barbet. El Yumbo is the locals' name for it. Unlike the Andean cockatiel, the males and females look the same, but this bird is just beautiful to look at. I mean, it's like it's been designed by the great evolutionary designer. He's got a palette of paints, and he's like black crown, red eye, grey all around the ear coverts and the throat, washes brush out, vermilion on the upper breast, going down to kind of burnt sienna or umber, kind of lime colour on the flanks, a black wings, black tail, and a blue rump. So this bird is just fantastic to look at. It's one of the real signature birds of the cloud forest. And they sit on a branch together. They do an antiphonal duet. So the male sits next to the female and the female sits next to the male. And the male just nods to the female. And as he nods, he goes, ah. Then the female goes, ah. Then the male goes, ah. And they get faster and faster. They go, ah, 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 ah. And you would not believe how far this song carries. A couple of miles away. It's unbelievable. And then they just kind of go and disappear into the undergrowth and make some eggs, maybe, I don't know. So seeing El Yumbo, or the toucan barbet, is a real thrill. And a specialist bird of the cloud forest of places like Makipakuna. Talked about hummingbirds. Also want to talk about tanagers. I mean, this is just such a wonderful group of birds. The cloud forest of Ecuador are the world headquarters for hummingbirds. They're also the world headquarters for tanagers. This beautiful kind of colourful group of birds. Now, this is the paradise tanager. It's got this lovely green head, blue throat, and a yellow and red rump. And so they go around in mixed flocks. So sometimes you won't see a bird for like 20 minutes or so, or half an hour. Then all of a sudden there are birds absolutely everywhere. And you're playing spot the tanager and trying to identify as many tanagers as possible. And you can see sometimes like masked tanager, swallow tanager, palm tanager, paradise tanager, golden tanager, all in one flock. And then they just disappear. They leave you standing there and you're just trying to identify them, trying to enjoy them, trying to photograph them and before they disappear. So yeah, I love seeing tanagers. But birds like the golden tanager, I mean, look at that. It's just gorgeous. I mean, it just lands on a branch in front of you and it's just like a little scrap of sunshine. What a bird. One of the reasons why I most wanted to go to the cloud forest of Ecuador and to Ecuador full stop was because as a student, when I was at Nottingham University studying biology, I used to drink Guinness. And I can never quite understand why a drink that's brewed in Ireland on the banks of the Liffey in Dublin, they use a toucan, a South American bird, to advertise their alcoholic stout beverage. Well, I remember those adverts, they kind of, Guinness is good for you with a big toucan on. And so it's probably the bird I most wanted to see. And this is a bird that we really should see when we're in the cloud forest. This is a crimson-rumped toucanet. And it's actually probably about the size it is on your screen, hopefully. They're about 6 or 8 inches high, maybe 7 or 8 inches high. They're not particularly large. If you cut their tail feathers off, you can probably stick them in a pint pot. But when one of these flies in, and they always fly in a kind of arc because their bills are quite heavy and they just have to kind of get the drop down. And when you catch it with something like a crimson rump toucanet coming into a fruiting tree to eat the fruit there, it's a really special moment. I mean, look at that. It's just a dazzling bird. Almost makes me want to go and pour a pint of Guinness right now just looking at it. So crimson rump toucanet is quite a common bird. But if we get a chance to go a little bit higher onto the ridges above Makipakuna, we get an opportunity to look for the really rare one. This is another bird that's endemic. It's confined to northwest Ecuador and southwest Colombia on the western slopes of the Andes at about 1,800 to about 2,500 meters, so pretty high. But we start at a high level anyway, so the Makipakuna base is at about 1,200 to 1,400 meters. This is a plate-billed mountain toucan. And so if you get a chance to kind of get up there and see this bird, then you know you've seen a really, really good quality bird. Look at that. Toucan barbet. I'm aware of the fact I've talked a lot about birds, and Makipakuna certainly has plenty of other things to look at. There are a few mammals there. They do get spectacled bear, probably not at the time that we're going to be there, but don't worry about that because this tour's got spectacled bear covered. But every chance of seeing things like armadillos, we might get a chance of seeing coati on the trails. And this is a jaguarundi. Now, I've seen jaguarundi 3 or 4 times in Makipakuna itself. I mean, it's a slim chance, but you've got to be in it to win it. So if you're out early in the morning or late in the evening, and you get, dawn and dusk are really great times to look for mammals because they're quite a lot of them are crepuscular. Then keep an eye on the trails, and something like this could walk straight past. So certainly a chance of seeing things like armadillos, coatis, and jaguarundis. Lots of invertebrates, of course. I mean, it's not just about feathers and fur. The butterflies are just incredibly biodiverse. Once again, in Britain, you get 50-odd species of butterfly. In South America, there are thousands of different species. I'm not even entirely sure how many species of butterfly there are in Makipakuna, but when I was doing my research work on a project in the reserve very close by in Los Cedros, I collected over 800 species of moth. So I would think certainly there's going to be 300 or 400 species of butterfly in the reserve. Now, a lot of them are really hard to identify. Sometimes you just got to enjoy them when they fly past and try and get a photograph or just see if you can work out which family they're in. And butterflies are quite difficult to identify because a lot of them do this mimicry, this Batesian or Müllerian mimicry. Butterflies that aren't poisonous try to mimic a butterfly that is poisonous. So, for example, the classic one is the monarch, which is poisonous because it eats milkweed, but there are lots of species that try to look like the monarch because they aren't poisonous, but they want to say, they're like, effectively, they're sheep in wolf's clothing. But there are a few butterflies that are easy to identify. This is Mariposa 89, which is butterfly 89. So this one is really easy. So if you spot this one, you should be able to put a name to it. Lots of butterflies that you've probably never seen elsewhere. These are the Ithomiid or glasswing butterflies. Now these are birds that are these are butterflies that hang around in little sunshine patches in the cloud forest, low to the forest floor. And these are glass wings. So they're wings that almost they're translucent. You can look through them, but they're really, really stunning. And all the glass wings are confined largely to kind of Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, and a little bit of Brazil. So looking out for the glasswings is a lot of fun if you find a little sunshine patch in the forest. So having spent some time in the cloud forest, we go back to Ecuador, where I used to live. I used to live in this. This is the old town. I used to live in the new town. It's a lovely, diverse city. As I say, it's got the Antiguo quarter, the old quarter, and the much more modern, bustling quarter. I've lived there. I've never had any problems there whatsoever. It's a great country, particularly if you're hanging around in the tourist quarters around Avenida Amazonas and Reina Victoria, where all the tourists hang out. And we'll be spending lots of time. You know, we hopefully get a chance to kind of have a little wander around and soak in some of the vibe of the capital city. And then we're whisked off and we go to Antisana Reserve. Now, those of you that are going this year, originally we were going to look for Oso Antiojo, spectacle bear, a bit further north at Pinampero. But we've made a decision to change to Antisana because basically it's much surefire to get spectacle bears there. Now, Antisana is a big national park, kind of southeast of Quito. And where I was on the western slopes, or when we were at Maki Pacuna, we'll be on the western slopes. You go into the Inter-Andean corridor where Quito is, and then you go up the eastern Cordilleras, and right on top of places of the eastern Cordilleras, you get a reserve called Antisana. It's an absolutely beautiful high montane reserve. And this is the Antisana volcano, which is the fourth highest mountain in Ecuador. Chimborazo is the highest at 6,300. Then Cotopaxi, which I've climbed, which is just short of 6,000. Then you've got Sangay, I think Nakambie, and then you've got Antisana, so it's the fifth highest. So we're talking about 5,500 meters, which is 5.5 times taller than Snowdon and Scafell Pike in England, and probably 4 times higher than Ben Nevis. We're talking flipping high. But we won't be going up there. We'll be going into the Paramo further down. So you're quite high up here. You're about 3,500 meters. So we're in what they call the Paramo, which is the treeless zone. So you've gone right up, you go through the cloud forest, and eventually get to the elfin forest, and then it's too hard for trees to survive. It's too cold, too harder winters, and that's where the Paramo vegetation takes over. So these places are wonderful. And for those of you who know their plants in Britain, there's similarities with kind of moorland and heathland in Britain. You get these kind of ericaceous plants, which are like heather and cross-leaved heath. So this is the same family. This is the Ericaceae family. And you get all these kind of weird things like giant groundsels there as well. But the reason we're going is for this. Paddington bear, the Oso Antiojo, the only native bear in South America. So really, this is Paddington. If it can, it comes from deepest, darkest Peru, but it also lives in deepest, darkest Ecuador. Now, even though I've spent over 1.5 years in Ecuador, I have never seen spectacle bear. Since I left Maki Pacuna, the bears are now coming to eat the aguatillos, which are the small avocados that are on the reserve. And if you saw Planet Earth 3 very recently, or 7 Worlds, I think it was, there was a fantastic sequence of spectacle bears eating avocados, or the mini avocados. And that was Maki Pacuna, the reserve I used to work on. That if you come on this trip, you'll be going on. But even though we're not the right time in Maki Pacuna, it's a really good time in Antisana to catch up with the spectacle bears. So we'll be going quite high. We'll be with expert guides, and we'll be going uphill and down dale. They know really well where the fruiting trees are. So hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up with the Oso Antiojo. And believe me, it's probably the species I most want to see on the planet. I got very close when I was there last time. I was at Maki Pacuna, right on top of one of the ridges, and this bear ran off through the vegetation, and all I saw was the vegetation moving as it ran off. So I didn't actually see any fur at all. So we're very, very hopeful we'll see it in April. So yeah, I hope it'll be a red letter day. It'll be a day I never forget, the day I see Paddington bear in the wild. What an animal. Just so excited about clapping my eyes on this. The other reason for going to Antisana as well is there's lots of good montane birds, including probably one of the most iconic birds in Ecuador. And it's on the Ecuadorian flag. It's the Andean condor, one of the biggest wingspans in the world. Now, I've seen Andean condor at Cotopaxi National Park, and I've seen them in Argentina. And I'm really looking forward to going to Antisana, which is the best place to see Andean condor. Now, I've got showing you a few pictures of Andean condors, which I took when I was in Argentina. But hopefully we'll get just as good a view when we're in Ecuador. I'm just going to go through a few shots now. Once again, I hope some of you can hear these lovely kind of fluting panpipes over my shots. So just imagine, even if you can't hear it, just try and get the panpipes in your head and just sit back. We're looking out over a huge canyon, high up. We've just seen spectacled bears, and then we're looking for the Andean condor. So here we go. This is the panpipes, and hope you can hear it. I so hope you could hear the pipes there going with those shots of the Andean condor. So there we are in Antisana, really high up. And then we drop all the way down. We slide on a massive big slide all the way down into El Oriente, which is the Amazon. So the eastern half of Ecuador, you can see in this map, is all the very western fringes of the Amazon. And we'll be going to Napo Wildlife Center, which is, I've been to Cuibano and Yasuni, and this is right on the edge of Yasuni. So I've not been to Napo Wildlife Center before, but I've been to a couple of sites, a couple of centers that are very, very close to this. And I've seen most of the wildlife that you'd expect to see at Napo. It's just the Amazon rainforest, for those who haven't been. I mean, tropical forest is my favorite habitat. Some prefer mountains, some prefer the Arctic, the Antarctic, some like the African plains, some like the tropical island paradise of Galapagos or Madagascar. For me, rainforest is my favorite. It's not the easiest place to see wildlife. It's hot and steamy. And sometimes you forget that when you go in there, there's so many species jammed into this habitat because the stuff is shy and it's quite hard to see. But if you're canny, spend a bit of time, just soak up the ambience of the place, it does slowly reveal itself to you. So for me, this picture is just beautiful beyond compare. I love rainforest, and the Amazon is the finest rainforest in the world. There's a lovely phrase about tropical rainforests, and particularly Ecuador. And there's a phrase, it's what's common is rare, and what's rare is common. So common species are actually really hard to find, because if you look at that forest down there, you look at one tree, then the next tree is different, then the next tree is different. So the rare species are really common because there's lots of species where there might only be one representative. But species that are common are quite unusual because there's so much diversity and so much competition that very few species dominate. So going in this forest and just looking at all these trees is just a treat beyond belief. So when we're in Napo, we'll be kind of canoeing in, paddling in to Napo Wildlife Center. This is a really great way of seeing a lot of wildlife. We'll be spending time in the Aguas Negras, which are the black waters. So you get a guide up front and you get maybe someone like me sat at the back, and we'll be looking for lots of wildlife because it's a good way to look into the canopy. And there's lots of wildlife that likes either hanging in the water, like the river dolphins or the caimans, and a lot of the birds are on the forest edge as well. So this is a really good, easy way to get a big wildlife hit. So this is Napo Wildlife Centre with tower canopy, so we can look down on the canopy. But we will be spending quite a bit of time paddling around, looking at these beautiful, beautiful forests, that gallery forests that run alongside. One of the famous birds, of course, is the hoatzin, which we will see, without doubt, because they always hang around by the water. They're kind of punks, and they're a really ancient bird in terms of lineage. And when they get scared, their natural reaction is not to fly away, but just dive into the water to hide. And when they come out of the water, they kind of got hooks on their wings, and they kind of climb back into the vegetation with these hooks. So it's one of the easiest birds to identify. It's one of the most distinctive. And if you go to the Western Amazon, then hoatzin has to be kind of pretty high on your bucket list of must-see birds. Biodiversity again. I mean, we talk about the biodiversity in Britain. We've got one kingfisher, one species of kingfisher, which is an absolutely beautiful bird. But I would be disappointed if we don't see 4 or 5 different species of kingfisher in Napo Wildlife Centre. This is the Amazon kingfisher. We should see ring kingfisher, belted kingfisher, and a few others as well. But these will be kind of perching there by the side of the river, waiting for their breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So you've got to try and get the canoeist to try and stop so you can take a picture or identify it. So we'll be seeing lots and lots of kingfishers while we're canoeing around the Aguas Negras. My absolute favourite mammal of the rainforest is the giant river otter, El Lobo del Rio. When I first got a job in television, before I worked on the one show, because I speak fluent Spanish, I got to work on a series called Andes to Amazon. I was working with a very well-known cameraman called Charlie Hamilton James, and we spent 3 months filming El Lobo, which is the wolf of the river, El Lobo del Rio, the giant river otter. It's just the most marvelous animal. So it comes out about 10 o'clock, so you'd have to get up early. It swims around, it beats up the caimans, scares them away. It goes for a siesta in the middle of the day. It comes out in the afternoon, catches some piranha, beats up the caiman again, brings out its youngsters, and it goes, and it pops its head up all the time when it's in the water. So this is what you often see. And you can identify the individual giant river otters from the throat patterns. It's like a pine marten. Each throat pattern is unique to that individual. And these are big otters. I mean, otters in Britain are about 1 meter long. These are over 2 meters long. They are turbocharged, and they are absolutely brilliant animals. So that's one thing we're going to be looking really hard for when we go to Napo Wildlife Centre, looking for El Lobo del Rio, the giant river otter. Lots of you, I'm sure, who kind of been traveling a lot with Wildlife Worldwide have gone to Brazil, gone to the Pantanal, where you see lots of capybara, the world's largest rodent. We'll also get a chance to look for capybara in the water at Napo Wildlife Centre. Look at these little babies as well. I mean, isn't that amazing? It's the largest rodent in the world. Wonderful. And of course, these are the animals that get beaten up by the giant river otters. We'll get a chance to see the black caiman in the water, kind of like logs floating along. You'll be absolutely fine. Don't worry. We won't be kind of going for a swim in an area where there's any black caiman. I think it's very rare. They attack anyway. We're not talking saltwater crocodile. But getting a chance to kind of kayak past them gives you a little kind of frisson. You know you're alive when you float past in a wooden canoe a black caiman. So we'll certainly be looking for black caiman as well. There you are in your boat, and you're looking up. So you've got the kind of trees on this side, you've got the water below, and the birds of prey are just incredibly diverse. They're really hard to identify, actually. We'll have a local guide with us. Hopefully it'll be one of the local guides who live there, one of the Quechuan Indians. So the great thing about all these trips that you guys go on with Wildlife Worldwide is we support local communities. And Napo Wildlife Centre is a community-run initiative. So the money doesn't go to America or to Britain. The money stays in the local guides, the chefs, the people who kind of clean the rooms at Napa Wildlife Centre, they're all local Quechuan Indians. And it's in their own interest to protect the forest because they make a livelihood out of people like ourselves coming to see the forest. So there you are, you're looking up, blue sky above you, and you see this big bird of prey with black and white underwings and a big hawk swallowtail tail. And that is a swallowtail kite. So we'll see vultures, lots of big vultures like turkey vulture, TVs, black vulture, hopefully kind of king vulture, yellow-headed vulture, lots of raptors, and we'll also hopefully see the swallowtail kite, which is a really super bird. So as well as doing these kayaking, these canoeing trips around the black waters, we'll also get a chance to walk through the forest and hopefully catch up with some of the Amazonian wildlife. As I said earlier, sometimes it's not like going to the African plains where it's like, oh, there's a lion over there. There's a cheetah over there. Oh, yeah, has anyone seen any? Oh, there's the wildebeest. Oh, yeah, there's a giraffe over there. That's wildlife made easy. We like it a little bit trickier because when you see the stuff, it's so exciting. It slowly reveals itself to you. And walking through the forest, you'll get to see some of the really cool birds, like the professional ant birds, and hopefully some of the monkeys as well. But one animal I can guarantee you will see is the leafcutter ant, Atacephalotes. These are often wandering through the forest, dum, 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 carrying 2-3 times their body weight with these leaves. They go up into one tree. They'll strip this tree of all its leaves. They'll use their mandibles to cut bits down. And it's the most astonishing life cycle. They'll take this leaf back to the bivouac, where there's a ball of ants, where their nest is. And then the ants will chew up those leaves and they'll cultivate a fungus on it that grows on the leaves. And that fungus, the only place it's found in the world is in a leafcutter ant nest. And they feed on that fungus, which is a remarkable lifestyle. So it's a symbiotic relationship. The fungus needs the ants need the fungus, and it all works beautifully. So everywhere you go, you'll get the kind of leafcutter ants walking past with bits of leaf. And hopefully you'll see army ants, which are brilliant because they're the ones that they're insectivorous, that are predators, that wander through the forest in big masses, looking for things like grasshoppers and crickets that can't jump out of the way, and they'll swarm it and they'll dismember it and take it back to their nest. And it's brilliant when you catch it with an army ant swarm because you get these professional ant birds. Now, these are a number of species of ant birds that are just above the ants. And as the grasshoppers and crickets and all the invertebrates jump out of the way, they catch them. So basically, they use the ants to flush out the food for them. And the only other place you ever see these professional ant birds is above the army ant colonies. So it's a brilliant thing to look for. Lots of lovely butterflies. I talked about Mariposa 89, butterfly 89. But this is one of those butterflies that you will hopefully get a chance to see. Quite often when you're on the water, actually, they're like swallowtails. They fly really fast. It's really hard to get a picture of them when they're open or when they're static. I mean, they go past like as big as my hands. It's like a big flapping bat going past you. And Frank Lambert, who's a very well-known naturalist in South America, called the morphos the bluest thing in the world. And he's absolutely right. When the sun catches the wings and you see that iridescence, and you catch that iridescence on hummingbirds as well. So sometimes the hummingbirds can look dark, then all of a sudden they turn towards the sunlight. And it's almost like you have to put your sunglasses on because they're dazzling. And it's the same with the butterflies. When their wings catch the light at a certain angle and the sun's out, they look the bluest things in the world. What a super butterfly. So here we are kind of, looking down on the Amazon rainforest with the kind of oxbow lakes and the black waters. And we'll get a chance to spend a bit of time above the canopy as well because they've got a canopy tower. Now, sometimes when you're looking up, you get a sore neck because a lot of the birds are up in the top of the canopy, and it's quite hard to see the colours because what you're doing is you're looking up and the sun might be above. So you're looking at trying to identify a bird that is maybe 25 meters above you and looking black because you can't see it very clearly. But once you get up into the canopy, you can suddenly look down and see these wonderful birds and wonderful mammals. And certainly I mean, if you want to see mammals, monkeys, Napo Wildlife Centre is absolutely brilliant. We should see 8, 9 species of monkey easily. This is got the name, brown. It'll come to me anyway. This is one of the monkeys that we'll definitely see. I've completely forgotten its name. Its local name is Chorongo, which is one of the really common monkeys here. And this is a monkey I can't remember the name of, which we certainly should see as well. This is the squirrel monkey. So we'll see lots of different species, and lots of little tiny tamarin monkeys as well. These are really minute. We should see emperor, hopefully, should see saddlebacked, and this is black mantled tamarin. So looking out for monkeys and getting your kind of checklist going with all the different species you've seen and hopefully getting a picture of it, it'll be a really nice kind of element of the trip. So yeah, certainly for primates, Napo Wildlife Centre has got lots of bases covered. And this is the famous howler monkey. This is the red howler monkey. And it's famous, of course, for its the males have got these huge big gular pouches. And every dawn and dusk, and even during the day, they'll call to other troops further away in the forest, and they've got this call. And I always think it's because they're kind of sitting on their testicles. Because the other thing you notice about howler monkeys is they've got enormous testicles, and so maybe they've just kind of sat on the branch slightly funny, and they're going, ooh. But anyway, you'll get a chance to see, or certainly hear, the howler monkeys while you're there. I mean, a really special monkey. They're quite lazy. They don't move. They're not like spider monkeys swinging through the trees. But you should get a chance to catch up with them. And the brilliant thing is with guides who know the forest like the back of their hand, and they'll know exactly, hopefully, where we can catch up with animals like this. Sloths are another group of mammals that you find that are, endemic, so confined to the Americas. Usually there's 2 species. There's the 3-toed sloth and the 2-toed sloth. This is the 3-toed with a face like a clown. And actually, if you look at the forelimbs, it's got 3 toes. You can just about, I think, make out the 3 toes in my picture there. So we'll be looking out for the 3-toed sloths. They're quite often in the Cecropia trees, which are these pioneer trees that shoot up, often near the water. And they're remarkable animals. They've actually got a species of moth that lives in their fur. They've got algae that grows in their fur. And they move really, really slowly. And when they go down to the forest floor, when they go to the toilet, you'd think for an animal that moves that slowly, they'd maybe hang at their bottom over a branch and do a poo over the branch. But what they do is they climb all the way down to the forest floor very slowly, dig a hole with their 3 toes, do their poo in a hole and cover it over. And people thought, why is it they doing that? It's risky being on the forest floor. There's jaguars around. And what are they doing that for? Pumas, potentially. And then they realized that they were actually fertilizing the trees that they fed on. So isn't that amazing? They're just basically, they're eating the leaves, but they're also giving back. So they're gardening, they're fertilizing the trees that they feed from. Remarkable. Birds, once again. For those of you that know me, know that I like my birds a lot. And Ecuador, of course, is the 2nd most biodiverse country in the world, next to Colombia for birds. We're talking 1,600 species of bird. Now, this is one of my favorites. This is an Amazonian bird. It's the musician wren. It's a bird I've only seen a few times, but I've heard quite a lot. It's got one of the world's most beautiful songs. And it's a bird a little bit like the wren. It spends a lot of time on the ground, doesn't fly that much, and it marches round its territory, just singing the most beautiful song. And apologies once again if you can't hear this, but this is the song of the musician wren. So there you are walking the forest, and the guide suddenly goes, quiet, listen to this. And then you hear this song. It has to be one of the most beautiful songs in the natural world. So hopefully you can hear it. This is the song of the musician wren. What an amazing song. Hopefully you heard it. As it wanders around the forest floor, almost low its wings around its back. So yeah, birds like musician wren. And you're also looking at tree stumps. I can never find these. I consider myself a pretty flipping good birder, but the locals, I mean, there's just nothing beats their local knowledge. And this is a bird called a common potoo. Those who've been to Asia probably know the frog mouths, which are quite similar. You've got a kind of case of parallel or evolution going on there. And these are a bit like owls, a bit like nightjars. They sing at night. They often sing when there's a full moon. They've got huge big gapes, so they catch things like moths that are flying at night and nocturnal insects. They've got this song they sing at night, and they often sing when there's a full moon. And this is a picture I took of a potoo in front of the moon. And their song goes, I've got a really sore voice because it's cold, but the potoos go, and it just echoes throughout the forest at night. So hopefully we'll get a chance to hear the common potoo. And the locals think that this bird harbors the spirits of their dead ancestors. So this bird is never killed. It's never hunted. It's almost, I wish we could kind of come up with a story for every single one of the birds like this, so it couldn't be killed or couldn't be hunted. But yeah, this is a bird that's revered amongst the locals as well, the Andean potoo. We also might get a chance of hearing or even seeing the great potoo, and that's got a song that's nowhere near as similar. It's kind of much bigger than the common potoo. It just goes, ah! So it's nowhere near as attractive a call. But we'll certainly be listening out at night when we're having our, I mean, I never heard the word sundowner until I kind of started hanging out with Wildlife Worldwide people. All you guys going to Tanzania and Botswana and Zambia and Zimbabwe going to listen for the, and South Africa with your sundowners. But I want to start sundowners in South America when we're listening out for the common potoo. That'll be a good thing we can do. Lots of iconic birds, the hummingbirds, the toucans, the parrots. I mean, there were parrots in Africa, of course, there were parrots in Asia, but there's nothing like a macaw. They are flipping massive. I mean, when you see the macaws, they're about, meter 20, meter 30 with their tail. They're really noisy. They fly around lots. So the two species that are quite similar, there's the scarlet macaw, which this is, and there's the red and green macaw, which doesn't have that bit of yellow in it, has kind of like greeny in its wing. But they're just massive. And when you're in the canoes and you hear them and you're flying, the guide will call them, or I'll call them when we hear them. And look out for a red and yellow and blue, or a red and blue arrow flying over your head. So we'll certainly be looking out for the macaws and lots of other parrots. And certainly at Napa Wildlife Centre, there were clay licks because, of course, a lot of the parrots eat kind of fruits and nuts and seeds, and sometimes they need to kind of neutralize toxins in a lot of the fruits. So quite often they eat a lot of clay to kind of help with their digestion and to neutralize the toxins. And we'll certainly be going to clay licks where you can see large numbers of parrots together. I mean, in this picture, for example, you see blue-headed Amazons, and the ones that are static on the rock are mealy Amazons, really big birds with a kind of bicolored green and yellow tail. So really noisy and colorful place to visit. And sometimes as well, if you're really lucky, you might even get a tapir coming to the clay lick. So certainly during our time in Napa, we'll be visiting a clay lick to come and see the spectacle of all the parrots coming to feed after they've been munching on fruits. Now, people talk about birds of prey. A lot of people love raptors. And everyone talks about what's the biggest bird of prey in the world. I mean, it's maybe Stella's eagle out in Japan. Certainly white-tailed eagle in Britain has probably got the second largest wingspan. But there's no doubt as to which the most powerful bird of prey is. This is the harpy eagle, or Aguila arpia, as the locals call it. Now, this bird actually has not got a very long wingspan because it actually lives in forest. And when you've got a massive wingspan, when you're trying to get through trees, a long wingspan is not great. But what it makes up for in wingspan, what it lacks in wingspan, it makes up for in power. This is without doubt the most powerful bird of prey in the world. This is the harpy eagle. Now, I've seen harpy eagle a few times, and I've no idea whether we'll get a chance to see it at Napa Wildlife Centre. Every chance, if they know of a nest or you're always looking up, you might get a chance of seeing one. The ultimate sight that I've never seen is a harpy eagle flying off, carrying a sloth in its talons. I mean, grabbing one and flying off with a sloth would be, for me, the ultimate Amazonian sight. So who knows, maybe this April or next April, we'll get a chance to see a harpy eagle carrying off a sloth. But certainly lots of birds of prey. And if we're lucky, we might even get to see harpy eagle. Not talk so much about reptiles. Amphibians and reptiles, once again, hugely diverse. And this is an Emantodes. This is one of the snakes that kind of live up in the canopy. People sometimes worry about snakes. I've been in tropical rainforest for 3 or 4 years. I've never been bitten by a snake. We'll get a chance to see, hopefully, things like the fer de lance, which is a South American version of the rattlesnake. Lots of other snakes. They're just beautiful part of the ecosystem, kind of key part of how the kind of food chain works. So certainly we'll be looking out for the kind of snakes and amphibians and all manner of other reptiles as well. I suppose the poison arrow frogs are really well known in South America. The famous curare that the local Indians used to find the poison arrow frogs, get the tips from their blowpipes, and then wipe the arrows on the back of the poison arrow frogs, like the dendrobated and the phylobated poison arrow frogs, and then used to fire the poison arrows and catch kind of things like squirrel monkeys and sloths with the poison arrows. But certainly we'll be looking for a few of the little poison arrow frogs. This is me with one of the poison arrow frogs out in South America. So yeah, certainly really lovely creatures to look for. I mean, just whatever you like, whether you're into birds, mammals, if you love your plants, your orchids, your amphibians, your reptiles. I mean, the Amazon rainforest has pretty much got it all covered. So there we are, spending a few days in the Napa Wildlife Centre, and then we'll come back on the way back slowly to Quito, to a place called Papayacta, where we'll spend, I think, a couple of nights there. And that's kind of on the eastern Cordilleras of the mountains, really high up, about 3,000 meters, famous for its hot springs. So after the hot and sweaty Amazon and you're walking around, you can rest in the thermal pools of Papayacta. But I'm not very good at relaxing. I mean, you can take these trips a lot of the time. You can have half a day off if you want, if you feel like taking it easy and watching some hummingbirds, or just want to relax in the thermal springs. But there's lots of places to watch wildlife around as well. So the mountains all around Papayacta, they've got great rainforest, and there's lots of lovely wildlife reserves that we can visit. I think we may be staying either at Guanga Lodge, I can't remember, or close to Guanga Lodge. And this is a wonderful place where you can basically sit, have a drink, have a beer, have some food, and just watch the hummingbirds. One of my favorite things is getting the book and sitting down and trying to identify them. I know most of them now, but I don't know them on the eastern Cordilleras quite as well as on the western slopes of the Amazon, where I've spent a lot more time. And this is the buff-tailed coronet. This is one of the really common species that you might get a chance to see when you're at places like Papayacta. But there's something like about, if you spend a couple of hours at Guanga Lodge with all the hummingbirds buzzing in and flying in and feeding and then coming back and going to feed on flowers as well, there is one species that everybody wants to see, the sword-billed hummingbird. Now, there's something like 10,000 species of bird, but this bird has the longest bill to the side of its body of any bird in the natural world. It's absolutely amazing. The first time I saw it, I could not believe the size of its conch. It's absolutely astonishing. It just flies around. It's got this huge beak sticking out. And it comes down to feed at Guanga Lodge. And also as well, there are various plants in the Solanaceae family, like the devil's trumpets, which are Brugmansia, that do occasionally grow in Britain. You can see in some gardens in the south that don't have many frosts. that feeds in these long flowers that have these huge, big, deep corollas. So looking out for sword-billed hummingbird, I mean, you've got buff-tailed coronet and you've got kind of like sapphires and puff legs, and then the daddy turns up, which is just amazing when these fly in. I mean, look at that. And it's really great as well because quite often they'll perch there. And so if anyone's keen, everyone who goes out with me knows that I don't often take many photographs. I mean, photographic tours with Nick Garbutt and Alex Hyde and Ben and Sharman and a few of those guys. They'll do loads of photographic trips. But I welcome photographers on all my trips as well. Quite often it's wildlife spotting first, and because I'm a naturalist, and then photographing afterwards. But this is one of the few birds where you get a chance to really go to town and hopefully take a really good picture. So Brett Sharman, of course, I forgot Brett's first name, Mr. Sharman. So anyway, there you go. You get a chance to see the sword-billed hummingbird. I mean, come on, what's not to like about that? And while you're waiting for the sword-billed hummingbird to turn up, you get a chance to see things like turquoise mountain jay, or look at this, masked trogon. This is a female with a brown hood, black face, and the males have a kind of greeny, bluey head, a kind of nape and upper breast, and the black face. So you'll be looking for other birds as well as the main attraction, which is the hummingbirds, and of course the sword-billed hummingbird. And then we go back to Ecuador, and kind of reality bites. We have to go home. But what we do on the trip is we cover a huge amount of this wonderfully biodiverse country. So we'll go to the Western Cordilleras, the cloud forests in the west at Maquipacuna. We'll go into the Interandean corridor where Quito is. We'll go to the really tops of the kind of high mountains to look for the spectacled bear, or the paramo, should I say. Then we'll slip right down into the Amazon to go to the low-lying forest, the greatest forest on earth, to look for all these wonderful things like giant river otter, caiman, and lots of monkeys, and maybe an ocelot or something like that. And then we'll go right and chill out in the springs at the end, and then with something like a sword-billed hummingbird. So I hope you got something of a flavour of Ecuador. I mean, it is a country that's very dear to my heart. I speak pretty fluent South American Spanish. We'll be working with local guides the whole way. We'll be meeting guides at all the reserves. We'll be incredibly well looked after. The first place we'll go to Maquipacuna, where I used to work. So we'll get a chance to kind of visit, I mean, the lowlands, the highlands, the western slopes, the eastern slopes, the different types of forest. And I think by the end of the trip, you'll feel like you've really immersed yourself in the wildlife of this incredibly rich country. I think before I hand over to questions as well, I just wanted to kind of like flag up a trip that I'm doing this May, which is a new trip, the South Coast Extravaganza, with my good friend Ed Druitt. Those of you who have kind of been tour leading, been on tours with maybe Nature Trek, might have gone with Ed before. Ed's a very old mate of mine. We've been birding together in over a huge variety of countries. We've been to Spain, Poland, Israel, the Gambia, Poland together, and lots of places around Britain. And we're doing a new trip that's going to be fabulous, covering the counties of Hampshire and Dorset. And we're going in May, which is frankly a fantastic month to go. And this picture was taken yesterday. I was doing a 2-day recce with Ed, just checking out a few sites that we don't know so well. Lots of sites where we do know very well. And we're staying at this place called Warmwell House. Oh my God, it's absolutely astonishing. It's like walking into, what's that series with Bridgerton? I can't remember the name of it, where, you know, anyway, it's got period furniture all over the place. I don't think I've ever been in such a beautiful house. So we'll be taking over this house. It's an exclusive gig. It's really well situated, just southeast of Dorchester and northeast of Weymouth. So right in the heart of Dorset, hardy country. and we'll be exploring, obviously, Dorset and Hampshire as well. And some of the wildlife we'll get a chance to see. We've got lots of exclusives. One of the really exciting things is that ospreys are now breeding back on the south coast. And we've got an exclusive, hopefully, if they're coming back to breed in the same nest they bred last year, we will get a chance to go and see them from an exclusive location. The ospreys breeding back on the south coast where they should be. The old name of them, of course, is mullet hawk, breeding on kind of grey mullet out in the estuary and then coming to fly back. So how exciting. I mean, I know I go and see them in the Highlands, but seeing them in England where they should be is really exciting. Of course, Dorset is famous for its heathland, so we'll get a chance to look for things like Dartford warbler at the best possible time of the year. And one thing we're certainly doing as well is we're going to be looking for all species of reptile. So we'll go for adder, grass snake, smooth snake, slow worm, sand lizard, and common lizard. So this is my son Zachary with a smooth snake, the hardest snake to see. We've got an exclusive at Queech Nature Reserve, which is run by Herpetological Conservation Trust, where we're going out with Howard Innes, who's the chair of HCT, and an amazing guy called Terry Bagley, who knows these sites really well. We're the only ones allowed to go onto the reserve, and we'll hopefully see all 6 species of reptile in one day. I spoke to Terry today as well, and he's hoping to take us to go and see wall lizard, which is, there's a small colony of wall lizards there. So we might even see 7 species of reptile in one day. So it's a brilliant time of the year to go. We'll be going to the New Forest. We'll be going to places like to look for. We might just get a chance to see the famous wild gladiolus, but also we'll be going to places like Acres Down, where we're looking for things like honey buzzards. We've still got a chance of seeing things like goshawk as well. I did the recce with Ed yesterday. We had firecrest, we had hawfinch, and unbelievably, we met the owners of Warmwell House outside. We were chatting to them. Me and Ed looked up and went, hen harrier. We had a male hen harrier flying past the front of the house. So we are really excited. One other thing we're going to do as well is we'll just leave the counties of Dorset and Hampshire for just one of our trips. And we've got an exclusive with Dave Waters to go and see the Bustard Project. We'll go on a safari, a Land Rover safari, going to look at the great bustards back in Britain displaying. And hopefully there we'll also get a chance to see things like stone curlew and corn bunting and maybe tree sparrow as well. I forgot to mention as well, when I was there with Ed yesterday, we had woodlarks singing. So there's going to be an amazing array of birds. It's a new trip, a really exciting trip, the Wildlife Worldwide have never done before. And me and Ed are looking forward to seeing you. So thank you for listening to me. I can see Chris waiting to take your questions. I'm happy to talk about Ecuador or Ecuador, or talk about the South Coast Extravaganza. I'm more than happy to answer questions about Speyside Mull, Shetland, Somerset Levels. What else am I missing, Chris? Lots of other places.
All sorts. Yeah, Papua New Guinea,
wildlife,
Indonesia, yeah, Somerset, but all sorts. But yeah, thank you very much, Mike. That was absolutely brilliant. My particular highlight, all the animal impressions, I have to say. But in all seriousness, Ecuador is such an underrated wildlife destination, not just in South America, but also mainland Ecuador gets overlooked for the Galapagos a lot of the time. Not to say Galapagos isn't worth going to, but mainland Ecuador has a lot going for it as well. So, well worth spending time there. Just before I do questions with Mike, just going to start the poll. So bear with me 1 second, and I have launched that. So hopefully you can all see the poll. It's just a selection of trips that Mike leads for us. If you'd like to get more on that, then just select some of those and we'll send them out to you tomorrow. But on to some questions. The first one we had is obviously Ecuador featured in BBC News a couple of times not so long ago, and a few people wondering what the current situation is like. I can add some stuff on this, but I'll let you go first, Mike.
Well, I don't want to kind of preempt what you're going to say, Chris, because I know that I know a wildlife for wide trip with Nick Garbutt, my good friend Nick, who I went to university with. So I've known Nick for God since 1985. The two of us go way back together. So Nick Garbutt and Alex Hyde did a photographic trip to Ecuador. I think they just came back last week, Chris, didn't they? And they had no problem whatsoever. I mean, sometimes these kind of stories of a kind of couple of gunmen charging a newsroom down in Guayaquil, right in the south of the country, make news. But the bottom line is, it's a really safe country, in my opinion. I've lived there for a year and a half. I've never had any problem whatsoever in the country of Ecuador. We're spending a little bit of time in Quito. Like all cities, you have to be a little bit streetwise, a little bit safe. I mean, we'll have me there. We'll have local guides who will kind of like take us around to show us the various sites if we want to have a little tour around Quito. And you've got to be sensible when you go to any country in the tropics. But of course, you know, we're sandwiched in between Colombia and Peru. And when I was working there in the mid-late 90s, I mean, Colombia was considered a no-go area because of the FARC guerrillas. And then in the south, you've got Peru with the Sendero Luminoso, which are the shining path. So Ecuador was considered this bastion of a kind of sanctuary. And as far as I'm concerned, it still is. I mean, it's lots of tourists going to Ecuador, particularly staying in Quito. Lots of people flying out to go to Galapagos. A lot of people going to the cloud forest, a lot of Westerners, and of course, huge numbers going to the Amazon. So I don't think there will be any problem whatsoever. Our trip came back, no, and Nick and Alex had no issue whatsoever. But I can understand people's concern, but sometimes these stories do get slightly blown out of all proportion. But we've got a fantastic ground agent that I know Chris has been liaising with, who are incredibly experienced. I speak fluent Spanish. We'll have guides with us all the time, and I feel very, very safe there.
Yeah, exactly. And from a technical point of view, with the FCO advice as well, is that all the areas in Mike's itinerary are in the green areas on the FCO advice. So there is no warnings for those areas that we're going to. And like Mike said, just had a group come back, which is visiting a lot of the same places where Mike will be going with his group. So Napo, where they saw giant river otter, giant armadillo, and all sorts of great things like that. And also Antisana, where they had a couple of sightings of spectacled bear too. But we had a fantastic trip. So nothing but good things to say about Ecuador, with the exception of maybe higher security around Quito. Everything seemed to be going on as normal. And that's on news from the ground. So yeah, all good.
I think Chris, I think you have to be like any city in the tropics. You have to be kind of the areas you should go. I mean, there are cities in Britain. I mean, I wouldn't go around certain areas of London or Birmingham or Glasgow at night. You've got to be a bit canny. But I think we're in the middle of nowhere. We're seeing local guides, lots of other tourists, and we are just cued into the wildlife. I'm very, very envious of giant armadillo. Wait till I speak to that Nick guy.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll hide from you. Just another question with regards to when you were talking about Napo. We had a question in terms of some of our clients like to bring scopes with them and telescopes for their bird watching. And someone was wondering what the suitability of that was, given what you said about the understory of the forest, how suitable it would be to bring a scope with you for rainforest and cloud forest bird watching.
Certainly when you've got views, I will always take my scope with me, because the great thing is if we get a bird perched, and it might be kind of, we've got a view out, we've got a bird perched, like a toucan, quite often the toucans don't fly, then it means people can get a really, really good view. So certainly I will have my scope with me all the time. But quite often when you're birding in tropical forest, it's the birds are moving quite quickly, so you need to be kind of fast on the draw with the binoculars. If you've got a scope, I would say do bring it. If you'd like to, do bring it. Obviously, it's no use whatsoever when you're in the canoe, because you can't use it when you're in a wobbly canoe. But there might be opportunities, for example, where we've got a spectacled bear, where we'll be on a platform, or we'll be in an area where we've got a great vista, like sites in Antisana, where a scope will be really, really useful. So certainly when you're walking in the tropical forest, bins, without a doubt, are the most important tool. But certainly I will have a scope with me, and probably one of the guides will as well. So I would think do take a scope if you've got room, if you've got the weight to take one, particularly if you've got a nice light scope and you've got a reasonably light tripod, and then we can give you a kind of our opinion as to whether kind of it's worth going to take your scope out on that walk or not. So my opinion is always take your scope, but I understand that a lot of people don't have a scope, don't want to carry it. So if you don't feel like you want to take it or you're unsure, then certainly I will have mine.
Fantastic. And one last question. Don't want to take up too much of everyone's evening, but just a final question on what the climate/weather would be like at the time of your trip in April. And obviously, we're doing a range of habitats and environments, so there could be a range of weathers during your time out there. But based on your experience of the country, is there anything you would add to that?
Certainly when you're in the cloud forest, it'll be warm during the day. We're there when it's quite rainy, but it's also a really good time for wildlife as well. That's when the kind of orchids are flowering. That's when the bromeliads are looking good. That's when the birds are nice and busy. So I mean, sometimes the dry season, you might be a little bit drier, but it is rainforest, Chris. So I would say that the interesting thing about certainly the cloud forest and the western slopes is they tend to be lovely and dry in the morning, and they tend to rain in the afternoon. So we get our good walks in the morning, and then maybe we'll sit out when there's a shower in the afternoon, and we might be able to kind of get a walk in the early evening as well. The Amazon, I mean, it's the great thing is you don't really need a waterproof sometimes because it's so warm. You get wet when it rains, and then it's so warm in the Amazon, then it's hot and steamy, and you dry out really quickly. So you don't feel like you're going to get hot, wet, and cold. So you're going to get wet and cold because quite often, as soon as the sun comes out, you'll dry quite quickly. And it will be cooler at night in the cloud forest, and it will certainly be cool at Antisana. So I would take things like fleeces, kind of a fleece or two, just to keep you warm. But in the Amazon, you shouldn't need anything more than a kind of thin sweater. And obviously, I think particularly in the Amazon, when you're at night, you probably best to wear long sleeve shirts just to kind of keep biting mosquitoes down. I mean, there is malaria around, but I mean, I've never caught malaria. I've had malaria in East Africa. I've never had malaria. I've never caught malaria in Ecuador. I mean, it's at a fairly low ebb. I think most people will probably be taking antimalarials. So I think if you're sensible with all these things and you've got the right clothes, I mean, I use kind of fiber walking boots, or I'll even use wellies. Quite often they'll give you a pair of wellies to walk around in. They can actually be the easiest thing to walk around in. So it's just the usual kind of tropical fare really. And certainly the temperature is lovely, and it'll be nice and warm during the day and a little bit cooler at night, but there's nothing wrong with that. And it may well be rainy at times, but we have to remember ourselves we are in rainforest.
Fantastic. And anything with like vaccinations and malarials, it's always good to go and speak to your local travel clinic and things like that, and just make sure you get all covered over. So yes, thank you very much, Mike. I will stop the poll. If you could move on one slide, Mike, that'd be much appreciated, so I can let people know about the offer. If you are interested in any of the tours that we have, then you can get £100 off per person if you use the code on the screen, so EC Zoom24. If you quote that when you make a booking, you can get £100 off. All sorts of good stuff. We just launched a new photography brochure if you're into that sort of thing, and wildlife voyages brochure, and all sorts of things like that. Our new brochure with the lemurs on the front. Mike's also going to Madagascar on the Festival of Wildlife in 2026. He's almost going to be a non-dom status, the amount he's going to be outside this country. So, but thank you all very much for joining us. And yeah, all very good. If you're interested, next week we have Mark Carwadine talking about wildlife photography in Hungary. And the week after that, Mike's best mate, Nick, is talking about the big cats of the world. So if you're interested, please do sign up for them if you'd like to have a listen. But after all that, thank you very much, Mike. I hope you all enjoyed it. And if there's any questions, just get in touch with us and we'll be very happy to help. Have a good rest of your evening.
More than happy to answer any questions that people might have kind of following this chat, Chris, because sometimes I think we sign off and we suddenly remember there's questions we want to ask. And a big hello to kind of all my friends who've been with me before. I know a number have already texted me to say they'll be watching tonight. So I'm looking forward to going to Ecuador. I'm looking forward to going up to the Highlands in March. I'm looking forward to a lot of wildlife trips with Wildlife Worldwide this year. It's going to be an awesome year. Down to kind of, and a big shout out to Chris for hosting tonight, and Dan Free and Ian as well, and all the guys like Katie and Sue who've helped sort these amazing Zoom talks out. So thanks so much, Chris. Thanks to all of you for kind of giving your evening up. I know football's on the telly, so thanks very much for watching me instead of football. And hope to see you out there either in Ecuador or in Mull or in Speyside sometime soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike, and evening, everyone else. Thank you.